Hi everyone, happy Sunday. We have another episode of STEM Sundays with Emily here today. And as promised, keeping with our April Earth Month theme, the activity today does relate back to the environment again. So if you remember last week, we looked at how to prevent disasters from happening to our infrastructure and environment in general. But today we're going to be looking at what happens when a disaster does occur and what we can do to help clean it up and restore the environment. So today we're going to be modeling on a small scale what happens when an oil spill occurs. So most of the adults out there will probably remember the BP oil spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico. It's something that I learned about when I was younger and experienced it firsthand, in the news when it was happening. So it's something that stuck with me, especially since I've moved through my career being an engineer. So we're going to be modeling the BP oil spill on a small scale in this little bowl and looking at what happens when oil spills into water, but also looking at techniques that we can use if something were to happen like that again, hopefully not, but if something were to happen like that, what we can do to help clean up the oil from the water, the animals, the plants, etc. So we do have a few materials today. It's a little bit more than normal, but I was able to find all of these in my pantry, so I'm sure it'll be the same for you as well. So first we need a clear bowl filled with water. Doesn't matter what temperature, just a clear bowl, and just tap water is what I used. So next we're going to need some dish soap. Wouldn't be an oil spill without the oil, so I have vegetable oil here today, but feel free to use any that you might have at home. Now next, this is a fun little way to spice up the activity, literally, but also helps model what an oil spill would look like in the real world. So instead of using, this yellow oil, I added some cinnamon to my oil, and so that made it brown, looked like crude oil. Don't need to do this, but I thought it was a fun touch and also helps distinguish the water from the oil when you do the activity. You could also use cocoa powder or any other spice, but again, feel free to just use the oil. The activity works the same with or without a little cinnamon added. So next we have just a spoon, some cotton balls, just a few, you don't need a ton, paper towels, and I just have a spare bowl to use as sort of a garbage disposal bowl. We're going to be testing out different techniques using these cotton balls, the paper towels, and using the spoon, so I figured probably best just to have somewhere to put all of the discarded materials that we're going to be using. So that's all we need for the activity, and let's get started with modeling our oil spill. So I'm just going to move a couple of these things to the side to make room. All right, so we have our big bowl of water. Put this over here. Okay, so I'll show you guys my oil and cinnamon mixture. That way it does have a little bit of color to it and really does resemble what crude oil would look like if it were to be spilled in a body of water. So this is our body of water today, and first thing is we're going to create the oil spill. So again, we're hoping that nothing like this happens in the future. It really was devastating to the communities, the wildlife, everything around the Gulf of Mexico where the oil spill occurred. But hopefully through this activity, we can educate ourselves on what to do, even if it's in our local community, what happens if a small scale oil spill were to occur. So we're going to just pour in our cinnamon oil. I'm going to pour a good amount in. The oil's spilling off of the glass, so I'm going to make sure that we put that on a paper towel so it doesn't ruin my table. But here we go. So we have our oil and water mixing together, and as you can see, they don't actually combine together. The oil just sits on top of the water, and that's why these oil spills are so devastating, because they can't mix and they just end up coating everything that they touch in the water with oil. So on the top surface of the Gulf of Mexico when the BP oil spill happened. There was a thin layer of oil covering everything. So now we're going to look at different ways that we can remove this oil. So this big oil spill has occurred. How do we clean the oil up now? So a few different techniques we're going to try. First, let's just see if we can get rid of it using a spoon. So in the real world, that would be using some sort of bigger equipment to get rid of the oil off the top of the water. But for this activity, we're going to try using a spoon. So like I mentioned, the oil is just sitting on top of the water. So if we skim the top of the water, we should be able to pick up, if you can see here, we do have some oil here that I was able to skim off the top. But as you can see, you also pick up some water too. So you're actually, through this process, removing water from the body of water that's here. And it's really difficult to get a lot of oil in one scoop. So this process would take a very, very long time if you were to just use this process alone. But that is one option, and it does remove the oil. So next, we're going to use a cotton ball. So let's see what happens when we try to pick up the oil with the cotton ball. So I'm just moving it around on the top of the oil. As you can see here, I have picked up quite a bit of oil from the water, but again, there's still a lot left. This is just a tiny little cotton ball, but I think this works a little bit better than the spoon option because it's able to absorb into the cotton ball. So because of the properties of the cotton ball, the oil is able to absorb into the cotton, and it does pick up a little bit more with each rotation around the bowl than a spoon would. So I'm going to discard this. Again, not the best option, but a viable option. Next, we're going to try just a paper towel. And this is nice because it has a little bit more surface area than the cotton ball, but does have the same absorption properties. So I'm just going to dip the paper towel on the surface. As you can see, I have picked up some oil, but also some water. And if you try this on your own at home, see if you hold it up, it doesn't absorb quite as well as the cotton ball, so it's actually dripping back into the bowl. So even though you've done the work of removing oil, in the process of going back, you're actually dripping more oil back in. So it's not as effective as the other techniques. Now the last option that we're going to try is the dish soap. And a little spoiler alert, this is what ended up being the best option during the BP oil spill. And if you can see on this bottle, the little ducks, I remember growing up when hearing about this, that was the biggest thing that stood out to me, was all of the wildlife and animals that were affected from the oil spill. And I think one of the main focus points and one of the things that the media really latched onto was how the researchers and volunteers were able to clean off little animals like these ducks using dish soap. So something that is still used to sell certain products like dish soap. This all relates back to the oil spill that happened and is proof that this works to clean up oil spills. So what we're going to do now is drip some dish soap into the water. And we're going to just mix it up a little bit. So if you use your soap and then just mix up with your spoon as you can see, the dish soap helps to make the oil and the water combine. So even though this looks worse than the original starting case, it helps to combine the oil and the water. So it's no longer floating on the surface, it's actually breaking down the molecules of the oil so that it can be dispersed in through the water. So then what you can do is easily, now you can just dispose of all of this at once. So instead of it coating on the surface of the water, instead of it coating the animals and plants, when you rub a little soap on the water and on whatever product or thing you're working with, it helps to break down the oil, so it's much easier to remove. So that is why the Dawn, not necessarily Dawn, but any type of soap works best when dealing with oil. And this relates back to not just oil spills, but even if you're at home and you have spilled some oil on something, if you get a little soap, it's going to help clean up that process a lot faster than just trying to use a plain paper towel or any type of just paper product. If you get a little soap on it, it will break down the oil and you'll be able to clean up whatever type of disaster it is, whether it's a small disaster at home or a big oil spill like the one that happened in the Gulf of Mexico. So just a fun activity to use, and you can repeat this over and over again, seeing how each technique works to remove oil and how the soap ultimately works probably the best. So next week we're going to be doing a sustainable activity. I wanted to do it today, but I needed a little bit of extra time to collect some of the materials. So if you're watching this now and are excited about the sustainable activity next week, you're going to need to recollect some cardboard tubes. So that could be from your toilet paper, paper towels, wrapping paper. Any of those will work. It's similar to the winch that we did back in the first month of STEM Sundays with Emily. So we're going to need those again, but I thought it was a great way to show how we can use that material again in a sustainable way to do a really fun project. So next week is focusing more on a sustainable project rather than one that relates to a real life environmental problem, but still important for Earth Month. So thank you guys so much again, and I'll see you next week with our sustainable activity. Have a good one.